Hey everybody, I'm thrilled to be here today for this part of Faculty Development Day. So this is the Boyer Scholarship section of the program, and I am first, let me apologize because you just listened to me for the last 30 minutes and now you get to listen to me for 10 or 15 more minutes. So I'm really sorry about that. But if you have anyone to thank my colleague Dawn. She invited me to kick this session off, and I appreciate it. So the title of my part of the presentation is called Tracing Boyer, How We Got Here, Where We're Going, and How It Impacts Teaching and Learning. And originally, when I was invited to present a brief history and a brief overview of the Boyer model of scholarship, I planned on doing some historical research and really looking backwards at higher education in North America and how it's evolved over the years. And try to get to answer that question, that part of my title that says, how did we get here? And immediately as soon as I started doing this, I ran into a problem, of course. So and if you listen to my last session, I have a number of issues, and one of the big issues is the issue I've always had with teaching history, and that issue is that as much as I love looking at the past and figuring out how we got to the present, I'm always troubled by the fact that in my field nothing's really applied. You can't really apply what you learn to a history class in a practical way, like maybe you can apply what you might learn in a nursing class, or you can apply what you might learn in a biology class. So this idea of feeling like I couldn't always apply what I taught always troubled me. But ironically, when I started doing research about the Boyer model and scholarship in general, I discovered that the notion of being able to apply any practical knowledge as a product of higher education is something that's relatively new in this country. And what I mean by that is if you go all the way back to the 1600s and the founding of Harvard, all the way up to like the mid 1800s, this notion of applied research, of research or scholarship that contributes to some practical good really wasn't part of higher education for a number of years. And the early history of higher education in this country is really about developing moral leadership and developing intellect. And the notion of learning a skill or a trade was really kind of looked down upon by the elitist who really kind of controlled higher education in the first 300 years of North America. So, this notion of doing something practical has not always been part of what higher education is all about. But if you kind of trace that forward, what really starts to happen is in the mid 1800s, 1860s, a couple of things happen. First of all, the Morrill Act, Morrill, was passed, I think, in 1862 during the Civil War. But that was also known as the Land Grant College Act. And what that did was, it's where the federal government donated land to all of the states on which they would build a land grant college or a university. So if you look at places like Nebraska and Lincoln, or Michigan State in Lansing, or Ohio State in Columbus, those are all examples of land grant colleges. The reason that's important in our little journey here is that the government wanted the states to build colleges that would do three things. They would provide for an education in the liberal arts. They would provide for education and research into agriculture, and they would provide for education in the mechanical arts. And that really made sense at the time because the federal government was all about growing the economy and growing the country. And they knew that through practical scholarship that they could improve techniques for agriculture and improve techniques for industry. So, and that's sort of emblematic of that era. You're getting into the progressive era in the U.S. There's a real optimism about improving the human condition, and you see these great universities with with intentions of teaching practical skills growing up. So like Rensselaer Polytechnic, one of the first great engineering schools in the country, forms I think in 1840. Cornell around 1860, somewhere in there. And Cornell's cool because their founder, Asa Cornell, sort of encapsulates this spirit of the time, that he wanted to build a great university where anyone could go and learn anything about anything. So this idea of serving the community was becoming a bigger part of higher education. But as far as the scholarship that was done over this period of time, so what Boyer would call a scholarship of application, that was a valued part of scholarship at the time. So the scholarship of application is like agricultural scholarship, right? So if you think of a land grant college with an agriculture department, they're bringing in farmers, they're doing field extension work, and they're learning how to produce better yields with their crops, or new techniques for animal husbandry or whatever. So that's really applied scholarship. So that started to gain traction and become valued in the late 1800s. And the same with the scholarship of discovery. As the country started to industrialize and engineering became more important and chemistry became more important and biology started to become more important, the scholarship of discovery, the scholarship that comes out of a lab, the Nobel Prize stuff, that was the other sort of track of scholarship that was popular in the country beginning in the late 1800s and really all the way up to, I would say, still now. Those two tracks of scholarship, of discovery and application, are the most valued. And the whole notion of tenure in the United States in higher education is revolves around this notion of publish or perish. And what that meant was this hard research, this research of application and this research of discovery, that was the stuff of publications. That was the stuff of peer-reviewed journals. And that's how you got tenure. That's what you needed to do to get ahead in higher education. And that's really where the country was at and still is to some extent. In the 1970s, 1980s, Ernest Boyer came along, and Boyer was an educator. His graduate degree, I think, was in audiology, I believe, medical audiology, but I could be wrong. But he was an educator, and he became an administrator and became a college president. He was the chancellor at the state of New York university system, the SUNY system, and then eventually became president at the Carnegie Foundation for Excellence in Teaching. And the reason we're talking about Boyer, and the reason Boyer is pretty cool, is that from his experience in higher education, he thought that he saw a couple of things. First, he saw that higher education was getting really impersonal. And he found that undergraduate professors, generally who were engaged in a lot of research or a lot of service, were not the best teachers. And he did a lot of interviews, and what he learned from undergraduate professors was that there wasn't always enough time to be good teachers. And so this notion of scholarship of teaching wasn't really around yet back then, but already Boyer was thinking about, isn't the mission of higher education, isn't it all about teaching and learning to produce good students? And so Boyer started to work on a new model of scholarship. And the long and short of it is he really broke it down into 4 domains. And what he pledged was, or what he was trying to get across was that all 4 of these dimensions of scholarship should carry equal weight. And so the first one, of course, is the scholarship of discovery. And again, I briefly touched upon that. Anytime you think of hard research in a lab, that's generally the scholarship of discovery. It's pure research. It might not have an immediate purpose in mind, but it's discovery for the sake of learning. So a good example of that would be like the mapping of the human genome. Okay, so that's definitely scholarship of discovery. Or maybe discovering the limits of nanotechnology or something like that. Maybe doesn't have an immediate application, but it's valued. And so that's always the classic. That's the stuff you need to do to get tenure, and also the scholarship of application, if you remember our example of the agricultural stuff. But what Boyer said was, hey, we should look at the scholarship of teaching, and we should look at the scholarship of integration. And an example of the scholarship of integration certainly would be something like our IPE work here at Mercy College of Ohio. But the scholarship of teaching, you all know what that is, and that's what we're going to talk about today with Boyer for the most part in the workshops. So you saw some examples from earlier in the schedule, great examples of scholarship and teaching. So, it all starts with an idea. All you need is the research question. So, Boyer's whole thing was that the scholarship of teaching is as important as the scholarship of discovery. And the cool thing is, as you will learn, and as Don will talk to you about, that the scholarship of teaching is a way to move ahead. It's a way to enhance your CV. It benefits the community, and it certainly benefits the students as well. And the cool thing is that, in our everyday, let's go to work lives, go back to the classroom or go back to the LMS or whatever it is, now all of a sudden, all of those situations where we're interacting with students, all of those are laboratories for us to learn, for us to ask questions, and for us to develop research questions and questions of inquiry. So thank you so much for indulging me for the first 10 or 15 minutes of the show, and I'm going to turn this back over to Dawn, and I hope you have a great day. Bye.